Okay, everybody, welcome to the February 5th, 2021 Dallas chapter of the FileMaker Pro User Group. I'm Taylor Sharp, and we're glad to have everybody here. Today, we're going to have Brad Stanford talk about mobile devices and signatories, and he will be up here in a little bit, but we're going to start off with covering our announcements. One announcement I know of is that Claris Engage will be in October, not September, and it will be virtual this year, so it will not be an in-person one. So we're moving back to the virtual world again for a second year in a row. So I know Brad had an interesting merger announcements. Brad, why don't you tell us about those?
Well, yeah, we all know about Proof and Geist joining up together. And then Direct Impact Solutions in Canada has purchased AppWorks, which is Matt Navarre's company. And so that, I don't know what the result of that's going to be, but that is in the FileMaker news.
There we go.
What was the name of the company in Canada that bought them?
It is Direct Impact Solutions. And you can find them at directimpactsolutions.com.
There we go. Okay, any other announcements that we can think of? I guess as far as announcements, next month our presentation will be Robert Nod will be speaking about best practices, which I'm sure we can all learn from some good stuff next month. Greg, you got any announcements for us?
Nothing you haven't already astutely covered yourself.
Okay, well, without further ado, we'll shift over to Brad Stanford, who's always been one of the most creative minds in the FileMaker world. I always enjoy hearing from him because he certainly thinks outside of the box compared to me. So I will turn it over. Brad, you're up.
Well, thank you so much. That was quite a compliment, my friend. Let me move the old, see if I can get the camera out of the way. Nope. All right. Everybody see the screen?
Yes.
All right. So as Taylor said, I'm Brad Stanford. I'm working with Portage-based solutions. I've been with them for about a year now. And they are up in the, not Portland, I always say Portland. They're up in Seattle, Washington. So great group of developers. I love working with them. So in this particular presentation, I'd like to explain how you can get users to use their own devices to complete FileMaker tasks in your solution. And specifically, we're going to focus on signatures, but the technique we're going to be discussing is, you know, you can apply it to many scenarios, and we'll talk about that at the end. That's kind of one of the most fun things to talk about related to this technique. I'm going to be discussing FileMaker offline sync for Go in here only because it's part of the context of how we built this thing. It's not required for the technique that we're going to be talking about. It just so happens that it was in, you know, it's in the middle of that sync mess of ours that we built this thing. So there's that. The client that we're going to be talking about is a specialty freight delivery company in New York. And they have a semi-in-house FileMaker developer by the name of Jonathan Ackerman. He's actually a lone developer, but he works for them a lot. And he built their original prototype system in 2017. And based on that, they gave him a ton of feedback and said, let's do this for real. And so in 2018, I was brought in to help him with those enhancements. And one of those was creating this FileMaker Go-based system for their delivery drivers. And oftentimes, these guys are in warehouses and deep inside buildings or basements or whatever, and there's no cell service. So it had to be offline sync for this thing to work. Now, back then, I originally wrote a 2-file sync system where you have a UI, and then you have this other file that only opens to connect to the server, and then it closes. So you don't have that constant, hey, you can't connect to the server message. But once FileMaker 18 showed up and it started looking like the FileMaker Data API was the normal of the future, we went ahead and converted to that. And so it's a single file running on API calls currently, and it's all on 19 right now. So one of the requirements was to capture signatures for the delivery drivers, right? They make a delivery, somebody there has to sign, and there are 3 different signatures actually that we needed to get. And so I wrote that originally in the 2-file sync system, and then moved it to the FileMaker Data API, and we actually did a blog post about how we did that, if anybody's interested. But as the COVID crisis escalated, some of our clients, some of their customers asked if it was possible to not sign the delivery forms on the driver's iPad. And so there were a few problems to solve there. So obviously the initial fear was that COVID could be transferred via surfaces. And it was especially bad knowing that wipes and hand sanitizer were in short supply. So cleaning hands and devices might not always be the possible answer, the obvious answer. But even if it was, you have the issue of proximity, right? And nothing works like abstinence, as they say. So staying out of someone else's bubble is problematic when you're handing off the thing. And of course, the low-tech solution would be lay the iPad down, walk away, the other person walks up. You know, you could invent things like that. Still not a great customer experience. And there's still the surface threat. You're still both touching the same thing. But then there's this non-COVID related issue that I think deserves a lot of attention. And that is we have all these mobile devices, but all of our programming, or most of our programming, is still focused on people with FileMaker licenses. You know, and that's correct. On the one hand, we are FileMaker developers. That's what we're supposed to be doing. But there are many times where we're better served with an outside process like calling an API or doing what we're doing here and grabbing a signature from somebody. In our original solution, if the person who needed to sign wasn't physically present, then there were delays or unsigned documents or other undesired results that we wanted to not have those results anymore. So this request for signatures on remote devices exposed this idea of making processes happen outside of FileMaker Pro and FileMaker Go, meaning anytime, any device, and anyone. So this concept is similar to PSOS, Perform Script on Server, but instead of the server performing a process for us, we need to send that process out of FileMaker to let another human or another system do something for us and get a result back. I've started calling it PSAR, which is perform, send, and receive. I want to send something out and I want to get something. I don't care what the process is that gives me the result. I just want the result back so I can keep doing whatever I need to do in FileMaker. So in a case like this, you might think, well, why not use DocuSign? There is stuff like that is out there already. And early on, we did test DocuSign, but we needed that form to look a certain way, and it was getting very difficult to make DocuSign presented in that fashion. And so we decided to keep it inside FileMaker just for the design aspect of it. And especially as the assumption that we had at the time was this business is going to grow, and they're going to want to change those forms there, and that came true very quickly. So we are happy we decided to keep it inside of FileMaker. So Jonathan came up with the idea of using WebDirect as a platform agnostic signing device. And the original idea was simple. The delivery driver would send a link to whichever email address he needs to. That link would take the user to a WebDirect session and find their record. And then the user would be able to see their forms in that record and would have a signature block at the bottom. And once signed, the driver could touch the sync button on the iPad and update his own form with the signature that the other person just signed on their own device. That was the overall idea. And again, because they find themselves in basements and warehouses, when unloading and loading, they often have no signal. So we're utilizing a field level sync system that reads and writes changes at the field level. So when the user signs in WebDirect, the signature just doesn't magically appear and go because we have the sync as an in-between. So he has to touch the sync button to receive that signature back. Now there's one other moving part I need to mention here, and that is the industry is transporting very expensive items, and security is super important. So we made the decision to make this signature element a completely separate file by itself, completely disconnected from server. There's no way to inject code or anything that could grab any other data other than what's in that file. So I want to show you what this process looks like. But before I do that, we've got to talk about FileMaker Go just very quickly. We ran into many scenarios where code worked fine on the desktop and it did not in Go. And not that it refused to execute it, it just didn't execute like we expected. And we have a significant number of hours in this project that's basically listed as documenting the undocumented personality of Go and finding out what works best. We were jumping through hoops sometimes that we just did not expect to jump through. You know, I'm sure most of you have done this. You've troubleshot all the way down to, I think it's FileMaker, right? And we did that a lot. So, I mean, we were even going old school, right? We were throwing up the dialog boxes after each step in the script to find out where it would break. But even then, sometimes the dialog box would prevent the problem from happening because it would allow the iPad to think through what it needed to think through. And so, you know, sometimes we would end up throwing pauses in right there to fix it. And sometimes it worked and sometimes it didn't. So it was difficult to troubleshoot. Another thing is many of your why did you do it that way questions will be answered by the fact that Go is not pro. If we're doing it in a really weird circular kind of way, it's because something forced us to do that. And the second answer to why did you do it that way is because some client locations have low signal strength and therefore low bandwidth. So we made decisions based on how can we get the maximum work out of low bandwidth. So, you know, making individual API calls and pushing individual edits, that's not a non-starter in that environment. So what we did was we would record a bunch of things in JSON format and send that whole chunk of JSON back to the server all at once and let the server do the heavy lifting of what do we need to do with this data. So I think a long time ago in this group, we talked about, I want to say Heather McHugh was there. We talked about how even in a FileMaker Pro scenario in a WAN environment, putting all of your data in a global field and just, or in a single field, I should say, and pushing that field was a lot faster than anything else, right? So we have found that that's still the case when you're talking about low bandwidth, wide area network practices. So those were our caveats. Those were our things that forced us to do some hoop jumping, but it turned out okay. The system's been running for a couple of years now, and it's doing really good. So here's the process. Here's a little chart that I made up for our blog post about this to try and give you an idea of workflow. So first of all, when the driver has a form that's ready to sign, he'll touch a button and it'll send an API request to the FileMaker server with the form ID. And all the system needs to know is what form needs to be signed, right? So we just need to send an ID. The API in turn calls a PSOS routine that finds the form in the main system and then creates a PDF of that form. Then it sends that PDF to the signing file. Remember I said that signing file is off to the side, completely disconnected. So server reaches in there and says, hey, create a record with this PDF so they can view what they're signing. And then an email is generated at that same time for the end user with a calculated URL with a suffix that contains the ID of the signing form record in the WebDirect file. So one caveat here is that we found out that PDFs didn't work in WebDirect like we wanted them to. You know, interactive PDFs was just clunky. So Jonathan ended up making this process of paginating the PDF each in their own image record. So we actually have multiple records of images in the signing file, and that signing file is very temporary. Once they sign, all the records and related records go away. So there's nothing hanging around in that file. Now, one thing in this process, I keep mentioning email, and somebody asked me, why didn't you do SMS? And I didn't even know because that was Jonathan's side of things. So I asked him, and he said that this industry is actually, you know, kind of formal and partially secretive. So the probability of getting someone's personal cell to send something to them was quite low. And plus, it's highly likely that we already had their email address when we set up the form to begin with. And so it's just easier for us to send an email. However, on reflection, SMS is going to be faster and more effective than email. If you were to implement something like this, where you need to tell a user on their own device to do something, SMS would be just more reliable, we think, because, you know, how many times have you been waiting for an email to show up after clicking, you know, forgot password or whatever? So we would, at this point, recommend SMS for this process. So down in steps 3 and 4 there, when the end user clicks on the link, it opens up in WebDirect where they can sign. They sign it and click the save button that's there. And then on the server side, we have a script that runs every minute to check for new data that's been received, either via the iPad sync routine or this signing routine. And basically, we already had the iPad sync routine in place. And so we just added this at the end of that routine to check for any signatures that just came in. So there might be a better way to do that, and we'll look at that in the next slide. But this has been, like I said, been working for a couple of years now. So it's been all right. The server generates the signed PDF. It actually, you know, it takes the signature, puts it in the record, recreates a PDF with the signature in it, and sends that out to everybody that needs a copy. And then the next time the driver syncs his own device, that signature will be shown in the record that he's looking at. So that's the short version of it. That's as short as I could make it. So does that make sense? I mean, it's basically a round robin. The driver makes a request, the request is sent out, the person signs, that goes back to server, and server distributes that information as necessary.
Yeah, I had a question.
Yep, go ahead.
So you said you create the PDF and push it to that standalone file.
Mm-hmm.
How are you pushing that data in?
I think that's an API call. I'm not sure. I'd have to ask Jonathan. He wrote that piece.
Okay. So just like uploading, but that standalone one then is it's hosted on the server as well?
Yeah, it is. It's a hosted.
Okay. I thought you meant it was on the device.
Oh, no. That would be a nightmare, wouldn't it?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I was wondering how you're pushing data to that if it's standalone on the device. That's what I was.
Yeah. It's on the server. So it's just a WebDirect file is all it is. Yeah. Good question. Okay, so if we did it all again, one thing that we might want or actually need to change in the future is what I call that listening script that's running every 60 seconds. Now, recall we're not pushing into FileMaker records like most of you use the API. We're pushing, the only thing that we're pushing is edit records. So those edit log records consist of the name of the field that was changed, the ID of the record that it's in, you know, the table name, who changed it and when they changed it, the original value and the new value, right? That's what we're logging in that record. And so we'll stack a bunch of those edit log records together and push it in JSON. So that's running every 60 seconds. And the server's just saying, hey, did anybody do anything? Did anybody do anything? All right. Now, early in development, we had the script engine crash on us quite a bit as we were developing this thing. It wasn't enough to make me uncomfortable because as soon as we would get our hands off and kind of let it run in the field, it would be okay. So we knew it was our fault for being in it as we were doing it. But I don't know about the rest of you, but it is normal to have the script engine crash on me for who knows what reason. I've seen it more often than I ever wanted to. But it's not happening on a regular basis, so we just kept going with it. I also had the script stop because of bad data, and I had actually left an exit point in there. There was some sort of scenario that I thought, well, if it ever reaches that, I need to know about it, so I'm going to stop the process. And it did. And I thought it was a script engine crash, restarted the script engine, and it wasn't that. I was like, oh, yeah, that was the flare I left for myself. So that was good. That worked. And that left that left the server not being updated by mobile by about 5 hours. But once I started up the process again, it ran through it in just a few minutes. I would say 15 minutes at the most. So it's a nice, robust system. But in the future, I've got this highlighted thing here on the screen where you can see you can call a script via the API. We're thinking about that's what we would do next time, is every time the driver makes this call to generate a signature, the API would include a script call to say, hey, tell the server to activate this script and push that signature out. We think that's what we're going to do, what we'll do next. It seems the most logical course of action. And that way we can get rid of this script that's running every 60 seconds. So right now we have about 5 to 10 all-day users and 10 to 20 users that are out in the field just periodically pinging. It's a low enough number to where that script running every 60 seconds isn't getting overloaded. If either one of those numbers goes up by about 5 users, I'm going to start watching to see what the load is and if we need to change to this method. But that's about all we've considered for changes in this process. So considerations on this, if you're going to implement a WebDirect based input feature for your FileMaker solution, you're going to need to know how many licenses that's going to cover. Now, we at this point have really good data on, the activity of signatures, when those happens, how many concurrent signatures we would be looking at. And because these are API pings, they're really short. So you would need to have a couple, 2 or 3 or 5 people hitting send all at the same time for it to really rack up the license count. So we had a good feel for this. If you don't have a good feel for what that would be for your situation, then you'd have to either wait and measure or just take a wild guess and start, buy too many licenses and process of elimination, work backwards, or buy too few and see if anybody gets pinged for not being able to get in.
It doesn't take many licenses, concurrent licenses, pricing to get you to the point where it's just cheaper to get a site license, and that gets you 100 connections.
Yeah.
That's the solution most of us are doing, even though it's not how Claris anticipated or contemplated their licensing. But then again, they apparently never in their licensing contemplated anonymous connections, and that was brought up in the share voice again this last meeting. So
I wanted to say last time we ran the numbers, it was about 25.
Yes.
Right.
And that's the minimum you can buy on the site license.
Yeah. So yeah, good point. That will save you money once you cross that threshold. And so in that scenario, you're looking at something like, you're hosting a bike, a bike race, and everybody's signing up on the same day. Those kinds of, you'd want a site license in that scenario. So another thing, the fact that we had sync in the middle of this process really makes it far more complex than it needs to be for you. If you need to do a process send and receive, a PSAR kind of activity through WebDirect, just add a file. And if not, if security is not a big deal for you, then just add a table in your system. It's not as complex as we've made it. It was just that way because that's the scenario we had to build for. So it really is quite simple and quite elegant, and it's so nice because you stay in your FileMaker world. You stay where you're good, and layout. You know how to do that stuff. So you're not having to learn any API or anything. It's really nice. So other applications we came up with, anytime you need like a consent form, a waiting room environment, perhaps. U-Haul has a nice app. It's not FileMaker, but you used to go rent the thing and the guy would have to go out and walk around the truck and he'd mark everything. They do that on your device now. They send you a link and you have to mark your own vehicle up. I like that. That's really cool. And that would be a good implementation of this right here in the FileMaker world. So, scheduling, date selections, time selections, where you have to have a FileMaker driven calendar that says only these dates, only these times are available. That's a good reason to use this. So one.
Oh, got our freeze.
Yeah, Brad, if you hear us, I think you're frozen.
I lose you?
Yeah. Okay. Now you're back.
Okay. Yeah. So that's it for this. I'm going to go back to the flow chart here in a second, but I do want to point out this was Jonathan Ackerman's idea out of New York, and my role was to just implement his vision. And his information on the trouble he ran into with PDFs is probably worth getting a presentation as well, just for the knowledge transfer. So, okay, yeah. I don't use Keynote that much. There we go. Okay, so there's the flow. So let's start with the question of what scenarios might you use this in, and we'll work on out to the technicals and whatever else you might have questions about.
Well, I have a client that has homeless people come in to sign a form to get a COVID test, and the result of it depends on whether or not they get in a shelter or not.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a good one.
We're using it right now, but they're right now having to do the wipe and the whatnot. And,
yeah, totally.
That's a possibility there. I will say, in doing a lot of things, because they use a lot of FileMaker Go things, I agree with you that Go certainly isn't pro when you really start pushing it. And I also have found pushing a lot of things from a client through the script parameter and then having the server parse it out and save the record makes things go a lot faster, with the caveat, when I was pushing things like PDFs, one of the problems of script parameters is you're limited to 1 million characters, and you might
Right.
find it sounds like a lot, but when you start pushing a couple of attachments and PDFs, suddenly you can hit that real fast.
Yeah. There is an image. I ended up using an image specific API syntax to send images, so I didn't have to do it in a parameter. So I've got a blog post on that somewhere. I'll find it and send it out if anybody wants to see it.
So if I understand that right, the driver has the iPad.
Mm-hmm.
He initiates the string to go out to that person's computer or phone or whatever.
Yep.
The signature is done there, and then it returns back to the server that returns back to the driver notification that it was signed, right?
That's it.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah. So if everything is interconnected, if you're not having to worry about sync and you're not having to worry about too much security, and I think, and when I say security, probably what we did was more theater than it was helpful. I don't know that for certain, but if you're doing it the most simple way possible, you've got just a WebDirect UI out there that's integrated with your system that gives you immediate results. You know, if sync's not a problem, you get the signature immediately in the record. And, uploading images too. I can think of, I had a botanist friend years ago that was working in FileMaker, and images were their things, man. When you're in the field, you're taking pictures of everything. And that was one of the challenges for them, is how do we get these images back? So, if you just had a UI just for sending images, you take a picture and it sends, and take a picture and it sends. That'd be ideal for them. Yeah. You don't need the rest of the system running. They just need to be in the photo app, right? I guess that's what we would call it.
Right.
Pretty cool, Brad. I assume you've shared this with the Claris guys' marketing team.
Oh my gosh, no, they don't know who I am. They don't know me. I have a couple of friends at Claris, like everybody else. There's always one or two guys that up there, but yeah, it's a different world up there now that they've changed, and a lot for the better. I think Claris stumbled over its feet a little bit as they've made this transition to Brad Freitag, but they've started to get their feet a little bit, and I'm just going to give them some space to grow up a little bit and see what happens in the next couple of years. I think it could be really good.
Yeah, I just hope that we get back to real in-person developer conferences.
Yeah, I know. I miss that too.
So anyway, they want it also. I just,
Oh yeah, they do. Yep.
I just hope that they don't get, after doing 2 years of virtual, it would come around to the third one that they start thinking, well, why don't we just do it virtual again? I was like, no, it would.
Yeah. I'm sure the price tag is markedly different for them to host the online version, but the cost, the people cost is high. I mean, the community we build at well, I nearly said DevCon, right? That's a hard habit to break.
Yeah,
But the community we build at Engage and the deals that get made, even, that's valuable stuff.
it is. And they don't lose money on the conference. I mean, they charge money for it. So, it's not a lost leader for them.
Right.
I mean,
Unless you put too many of those little chargers in the goodie bag, right?
yeah.
What'd you say, Greg? Those are $10 a piece?
I thought it was creative. I like that idea. I enjoyed mine, at least for the week.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny. I'm still using my FileMaker bag from, I'd have to check the year on it. But there was one year that it was like, man, that is a good bag. And I'm still using it to this day.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I hope that sparks some creativity in somebody. And, a lot of times I'll hear a presentation like this and it doesn't solve my problem, but I heard something in there that triggered some other idea. I hope somebody got something out of it.
Yeah, I'm actually about to do something kind of related to this, where I have a client who's going to be displaying a lot of PDFs on web, and and he was so I'd actually like to get some more information about that. But if they all have a blog post or something like that, you've talked about some of this stuff, because the same thing. I had actually, he's just now brought it to my attention as far as like what he wants to do, and I'm just getting into this thing, and so I was concerned about that too, because I haven't tested it yet.
Yeah.
And he said that like what he's replacing does currently use page by page kind of stuff. And he didn't want to do that. He wanted a single PDF. So that's a problem? Like if you have a multi-page PDF, will it display okay, or does it not?
WebDirect so far for us has not been able to do that well, right?
Okay.
Because that's an interactive container field environment, and it wasn't working. I have not investigated JavaScript options for displaying PDF. That may be the punt there.
Right.
And Jonathan didn't have time either. It's just like, look, I need this working tomorrow, so we'll paginate it ourselves. So I bet the JavaScript answer is going to be your answer.
Probably so.
There's got to be something off the shelf.
Thousands. Yeah, we have thousands and thousands of things we have to display on through there. So I can't be splitting all these apart just for the purpose of paging them, and only because if they request them, they're going to want the whole PDF in one email or whatever, that kind of thing. So
I tell you what, maybe do you and me both a favor. If you'll just create a dummy one record container field thing, throw it up on WebDirect, and see if you get a different result than we did. We might have done something wrong that we didn't know. So if you get a failure, I'd love to know about that so that we can document it as, no, this doesn't work.
Right. All right. And what is your server? Windows or Mac?
It's AWS, so it's Windows.
Okay. This is going to be a Mac server, so it may be different.
Interesting. Yeah, I really want to know now.
So. Right.
Yeah, Apache's different. So then again, I'm also more interested in seeing who all's jumping on the CentOS stuff too.
Yeah, our issue with that was that it's not. That we had two questions. How do you admin that thing? And we're assuming that's still through the web browser. But then how do you backup? That was our most. If you have to revert to a backup and you're moving files around, usually in the GUI, I guess you're loading a GUI then in Linux to do that stuff.
Well, you can. I mean, you got a choice of them too,
That's right. I guess GNOME was what we were looking at.
Yeah, that's a big one. But
But you also could do it with by making your own web-based, to do it around, to move things around too. But
okay, that's interesting. All right.
Okay, Brad, I appreciate your presentation, and that certainly leaves some food for thought on a hot topic in the COVID world of today, which I hope will be over with in 6 months or something, but
Yeah, me too.
we will certainly see, and appreciate you taking some time to speak to us on it.
All right.
Picked up a few good things. Hope everybody will be back next week for Robert Nowd for best practices.
You meant next month, right?
Yeah, what did I say?
Did you say next week?
Yeah, my bad if I said next week. It's next month. Sorry about that, Robert. Straighten me out.
That's good. I got a bit of a heat all of a sudden. I was like, what?
And that's a nice FileMaker bar fight topic too. Standard practices. Everybody's got an opinion.
Well,
Oh, yeah,
I'm not. I hope that the topic is not necessarily going to go towards that part of things, but readability. You know, making
good.
sure that we strike for something that people after us or even ourselves, you know, can and backtrack and say, oh, okay, yeah, that made sense. You know, instead of what was I thinking again?
So you're saying that we shouldn't, for job security, we shouldn't be using UUIDs for our variable names?
That's awesome.
Well, let me think about that.
That's hilarious.
Okay, well, we look forward to that for next month. Without further ado, we're signing off, and good to have everybody here.
See you
Take
guys.
care.